Okay, so like right now, think about just how much you're staring at a screen.
Yeah, exactly. And
Mhm.
it's kind of amazing to think that like the screens that we use every day,
Mm.
whether it's our phones or our laptops or even, like a big jumbotron at a stadium,
Yeah,
or
or
like
yeah.
all rely on this like
The
fundamental,
lights in your house.
yeah, the lights in your house too, right? LEDs.
Yeah, and they all rely on this technology that like 20, 30 years ago was considered like basically science fiction.
Yeah, it was like the holy grail of lighting technology for a long time.
The blue LED.
The blue LED.
Yeah.
And today we're going to be talking about, doing a deep dive on the blue LED
Yeah, a deep dive into the blue LED.
and why it was so hard to make.
So hard to make. Yeah, and we have a lot of different sources to pull from. We have a documentary from Veritasium.
Oh, yeah.
We have some articles from ASM, which is kind of a material science website.
Yeah, they focus a lot on kind of the technical side of things.
Exactly. And then we have some other things from Tech Blog and Unilad Tech and UC Santa Barbara's Solid State Lighting and Energy Electronics Center.
So quite a mix, really.
Yeah, we're going all over the place. And I think what's really interesting is that, even though all these sources are talking about the same thing, the development of the blue LED,
Yeah.
they all kind of have their own little spin on it or their own little insights into, different aspects of the story.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it was such a huge, a massive undertaking that, there's so many different facets to the story and there's so many different perspectives on how it happened.
Right. So what we're going to be doing today is we're going to kind of synthesize all that information and really like come to an understanding of why was the blue LED so hard to make?
Yeah.
Like, why did it take so long?
Yeah. And who are the key players in this?
And what were their crucial innovations that like got us to this point where we have blue LEDs everywhere?
Yeah.
And then what's been the impact of that? How is the world different now that we have blue LEDs?
Well, I think it's fair to say that the world is a dramatically different place because of blue LEDs.
Yeah.
In ways that we probably don't even think about on a day-to-day basis.
Right.
But we'll get into that.
Yeah. And the Veritasium documentary, I have to say, it's a really good documentary. I highly recommend it.
It's very well made.
Yeah. And it got like almost 7 million views in like the first 3 days that it was out.
Wow.
Which is pretty incredible for a documentary about LEDs.
Yeah, I think it just goes to show how fascinating this topic really is.
Yeah, I think so too.
So let's dive in.
Yeah, so why was it so hard to make a blue LED?
Well, I think the first thing to understand is that like the quest for the blue LED didn't happen in isolation.
Right.
Like there's a whole history of LED development.
Right.
Going all the way back to the early 1900s when people first started to realize that semiconductors could emit light.
Right. Like the very first LEDs weren't even visible, right?
Yeah, exactly. Like the first LEDs were infrared.
Right.
And then in 1962, Nick Holonyak invented the first visible LED, which was red.
Right.
And that was a huge breakthrough, obviously.
Huge.
But then the race was on to create other colors.
Right.
And so green followed pretty quickly.
Right.
But blue,
Blue was this like...
a white whale.
Yeah, it was this like,
Pink link.
the missing link. Exactly.
Yeah.
And there's a reason for that.
Yeah.
Like, it wasn't just that people weren't trying hard enough.
Right.
Like, there was a fundamental scientific reason why blue was so much harder to create than red or green.
Right. So why was that?
So it all comes down to the physics of light and semiconductors.
Okay.
So light is made up of these tiny packets of energy called photons.
Okay.
And the energy of a photon determines its color.
Okay.
So blue light has a higher energy than red light.
Gotcha.
And green light is somewhere in between.
And so to create an LED, you need a semiconductor material that has a band gap that corresponds to the energy of the light that you want to emit.
Okay. I'm not sure I fully understand what a band gap is.
So a band gap is kind of like the amount of energy that an electron needs to jump from one energy level to another within a material.
Okay.
And so when an electron jumps from a higher energy level to a lower energy level, it releases energy in the form of a photon.
Okay.
And so the color of the light that's emitted depends on the size of the band gap.
Gotcha.
So for blue light, you need a material with a larger band gap than for red light.
Gotcha.
And that's why blue was so much harder to create.
So it's like the electron has to climb higher to get to that blue light level, and it's harder to make it climb higher.
Exactly.
Okay.
And so there were a few materials that people were experimenting with early on.
Yeah.
Zinc selenide was one.
Okay.
And silicon carbide was another.
Okay.
But these materials have what's called an indirect band gap. which means that it's less efficient for them to emit light.
So they're like lazy electrons.
Yeah, pretty much.
Okay.
So when an electron jumps from a higher energy level to a lower energy level in an indirect band gap material,
Yeah.
it's more likely to release energy in the form of heat
Oh.
rather than light.
So it's like taking the stairs instead of the slide.
Exactly.
Okay.
And so that's why these materials weren't very good for making blue LEDs.
Okay.
And so the material that everyone eventually realized was the best candidate for making blue LEDs was gallium nitride.
Gallium nitride. Okay, so we've got
GaN?
GaN.
Yeah.
GaN.
Okay.
And GaN has a direct band gap,
Okay.
which means that it's very efficient at emitting light.
Okay.
But GaN is also a very difficult material to work with.
Right. Like, why is that?
Well, it has a very high melting point,
Okay.
and it's very chemically reactive.
Okay.
So it's hard to grow high-quality crystals of GaN.
But what's the big deal with crystals? Why do we need crystals? So crystals are basically just materials that have a very ordered atomic structure.
Okay. Yeah.
And so for LEDs, you need a single crystal of the material.
Yeah.
Because if you have a lot of different crystals all kind of jumbled together,
Yeah.
then the light will scatter in all different directions.
Gotcha.
And so you won't get a very bright or efficient LED.
Okay, so we need a single crystal of GaN,
Exactly.
and that's hard to do.
That's very hard to do. Yeah.
Okay.
And then the other challenge with GaN is that it's hard to find a suitable substrate to grow it on.
Substrate being like...
A substrate is basically just a material that you grow the crystal on.
Okay.
And so the substrate needs to have a similar crystal structure to the material that you're growing.
Okay.
And it needs to be able to withstand the high temperatures that are required for crystal growth.
Gotcha.
And so finding a suitable substrate for GaN was a major challenge.
Okay.
And so for a long time, people were really struggling to grow high-quality GaN crystals.
Right.
And so progress was really slow. But then in the 1980s, there were a few breakthroughs that really changed the game.
Yeah.
So one breakthrough was the development of a new crystal growth technique called MOVPE.
OVPE.
MOVPE.
Oh, okay.
Which stands for metal organic vapor phase epitaxy.
Okay.
And MOVPE is basically a way of growing very thin films of material.
Okay.
And it turned out to be really well suited for growing GaN.
Okay.
And so Isamu Akasaki and Hiroshi Yamano were two researchers who were really pioneering this technique.
Okay.
And they were able to grow much higher quality GaN crystals than anyone had been able to before.
Gotcha.
And then another breakthrough was the development of a new type of substrate called sapphire.
Sapphire.
Sapphire, yeah.
Like the gemstone.
Yeah, exactly.
Wow.
And sapphire turned out to be a really good substrate for growing GaN.
Okay.
Because it has a similar crystal structure.
Okay.
And it can withstand the high temperatures that are required for crystal growth.
Okay.
And so these two breakthroughs really paved the way for the development of the blue LED.
All right.
And so now I want to introduce you to the third key player in this story,
Okay.
Shuji Nakamura.
Okay.
So Nakamura was working at a small company in Japan called Nichia Corporation.
Okay.
And he was really determined to develop the blue LED.
Oh, okay.
And he was kind of an outsider in the research community
Okay.
because he was working at a small company and he didn't have a PhD.
Okay.
But he was a brilliant scientist and engineer.
Okay.
And he made a number of key innovations that really led to the breakthrough.
Okay, so what were some of his innovations?
So one of his key innovations was the development of a new technique for growing GaN crystals on sapphire substrates.
Okay.
And this technique was really important because it allowed him to grow much thicker GaN crystals,
Okay.
which was necessary to create a bright and efficient LED.
Okay.
And then another key innovation was the development of a new technique for creating a p-type layer in GaN.
Oh, okay. What's a p-type layer?
So remember how I said that you need an n-type and a p-type semiconductor to create an LED? Well, it turns out that it's really hard to create a p-type layer in GaN,
Okay.
because the material just doesn't want to accept the dopants that are needed to create a p-type layer.
Okay.
But Nakamura figured out a way to do it.
Okay.
And that was a major breakthrough.
Okay.
And then another key innovation was the development of a new type of LED structure called a double heterojunction.
Double heterojunction.
What's that? So a double heterojunction is basically just an LED that has two different PN junctions.
Okay.
And this structure is really efficient at confining the light that's emitted by the LED.
Okay.
And so Nakamura was able to create a blue LED that was much brighter and more efficient than anyone had ever created before.
Okay.
And so in 1993, he announced to the world that he had created the first high-brightness blue LED.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's huge.
It was a huge deal.
Yeah.
And it really revolutionized the lighting industry.
So what were some of the immediate impacts of this?
Well, one of the most immediate impacts was the development of white LEDs.
Okay.
So white LEDs are basically just blue LEDs that are coated with a phosphor.
Okay.
And the phosphor absorbs some of the blue light and emits yellow light.
Okay.
And so when you mix the blue and yellow light together, you get white light.
Gotcha.
And so white LEDs are much more efficient than incandescent light bulbs.
Right.
And they last much longer.
Right.
And so they've really started to replace incandescent light bulbs in a lot of applications.
Right.
And then another impact was the development of LED displays.
Right.
So LED displays are basically just arrays of tiny red, green, and blue LEDs.
Okay.
And by controlling the brightness of each individual LED, you can create a full color image.
Gotcha.
And so LED displays are now used in everything from smartphones to TVs to billboards.
Right.
And they're much more energy efficient than traditional displays like LCDs.
Right.
And they also have better color accuracy and a wider viewing angle.
Right.
And then another impact was the development of blue lasers.
Blue lasers?
Yeah.
Ah.
So blue lasers are used in a lot of different applications.
Okay.
One of the most well-known applications is Blu-ray discs.
Right.
So Blu-ray discs use a blue laser to read and write data.
Okay.
And the shorter wavelength of the blue laser allows for a much higher data density than DVDs, which use a red laser.
Right.
And so Blu-ray discs can store much more information than DVDs.
Gotcha.
And then another application of blue lasers is in microscopy.
Oh, okay.
So blue lasers are used to excite fluorescent molecules in biological samples.
Okay.
And this allows scientists to study the structure and function of cells and tissues in much greater detail.
Wow.
Yeah. So the development of the blue LED has really had a huge impact on a lot of different fields.
Yeah. I mean, we're talking about a fundamental shift in technology.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's not just about making a better light bulb. It's about enabling all these other technologies that wouldn't have been possible without it.
Yeah, it's really incredible to think about.
Yeah. And so for their work on the blue LED, Akasaki Amano and Nakamura were awarded the 2014 Nobel Prize in Physics.
Which is incredibly well-deserved.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, what an achievement.
Yeah, I mean, they really changed the world with their invention.
Yeah.
And it's just a testament to the power of science and engineering.
Right.
And the importance of basic research.
Right.
A lot of times people don't see the value in basic research.
Right.
But the blue LED is a perfect example of how basic research can lead to technologies that have a huge impact on our lives.
Right. Sometimes you don't even know what you're going to find until you start digging.
Yeah.
And then it's whoa.
Yeah, it's amazing.
Yeah. And then all of a sudden you have a world-changing technology.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's a really inspiring story.
It is.
And it's a reminder that anything is possible.
Yeah.
If you set your mind to it.
Right.
And you never give up.
And you never give up.
Yeah.
So that's the story of the blue LED.
And I hope you found it as fascinating as we did.
Yeah. I think it's a really important story to tell.
Yeah.
And I hope it inspires people to learn more about science and engineering.
Yeah. And to think about, what other seemingly impossible challenges are out there waiting to be solved.
Yeah. What other breakthroughs are just around the corner?
Yeah.
There's so much that we still don't know about the world.
Right.
And there's so much potential for new discoveries.
Right.
So, yeah, it's an exciting time to be alive.
It is.
And I'm really looking forward to seeing what the future holds.
So if this deep dive into the blue LED has sparked a little illumination in your world, we invite you to spread the light.
Yeah.
Share this episode with your friends and family and subscribe to the All Sorts podcast on YouTube.
And be sure to check out our other deep dives on a wide variety of fascinating topics.
Yeah, we've got a whole constellation of captivating explorations waiting for you.
Yeah. And don't forget to follow us on X, Instagram, and Threads to stay up to date on all the latest from the All Sorts podcast.
Yeah, together, let's keep the flame of curiosity burning bright.